We left off with the Meraglim, the story of the spies. The spies were sent to scout out the land. This was their request. Now, the question is, if you have a person like Moshe Rabbeinu, who is literally the conduit for the word of Hashem, he's a man who does not tolerate an iota of insubordination. If he has any sense that the people are going off track, he will not allow them to go off track under any circumstance. They come to him, they said, we'd like to scout out the land. So the obvious question is, why? If God said it's a land that flows with milk and honey, it's a land that's filled with all wealth and indescribable positive experiences, why send spies? So they said, so the two approaches. One approach is, factually, they had to conquer the land. So when you have an army coming in to conquer, you have to know there's certain strategies. Do you enter at the weakest point, at the strongest point? You have to know the terrain. So they said, we want to know exactly, when we enter, where should we enter from? Although Moshe could have told them, but that's what they came. So innocently, they came with that point. So Moshe heard what they said, but then they said something. And this was the trap for Moshe Rabbeinu. If Moshe Rabbeinu would hear the word Chil Hashem, we're concerned that God's name may be desecrated. For Moshe, that was a red flag. They said, God promised us they're going to be houses filled with wealth. He says, do you think the Canaanites, they're going to leave their wealth exposed? They're going to bury all the wealth. We're going to enter into the homes, and we're not going to find any wealth. So it'll be a Chil Hashem. God's name's going to be desecrated. Therefore, we want to go scout out the land to see exactly where they're hiding the wealth to avoid and prevent this desecration of God's name. But the moment Moshe heard the word Chil Hashem, God's name being desecrated, immediately he already lost clarity on it. Because when it comes to God's honor, that's first and foremost. And God said, I don't encourage it, but I will not prevent it. Let them send spies. They want scouts, but of course God knew their intent. Their intent was, because they didn't trust God. They believed that God is only setting them up to be destroyed for various reasons. That was their own paranoia. You know, you do things for people endless times over, and you do something where they don't fully understand what you've done, immediately suspect you're out now to somehow victimize me. Hashem is out to victimize them. But look all that God did. 10 plagues, split the sea, miracles. You know, God could do anything. You know, but ultimately, we're going to be destroyed. That's what they believed. Except there was no way Moshe would allow it unless they come with an approach, which actually it was so-called Moshe Rabbeinu's, his cup of tea, something he would appreciate and only be concerned with. So now they went, and of course, before we discuss what follows, when they originally had even requested to go for spies, to send spies, at that moment, they already forfeited the right to enter the land. As we find, not that it's comparable, Avram Avinu asked the question. God said, the land of Canaan will be your children's, and so on and so forth. So we asked God a question. How do I know we will be worthy to retain the land? That question was an inappropriate question. Why? Because when God said the land will be your children's, he never said it's contingent on anything. No strings attached. No preconditions. So why are you asking, what happens if my children fail, will it be taken from them? God said it's unconditional, the gift is unconditional. That you ask that question, because it's inappropriate, your children will be enslaved, strangers in the land which is not theirs, they'll be enslaved, afflicted, and ultimately they will merit redemption with great wealth. So just for asking the question, that's enough reason that you deserve to be punished, or there should be a distance created. Asking for spies, which indicate a lack of trust, regardless of what Moshe Rabbeinu understood, God said they're not going in. They're not going in. Now, if God would have said that, what would that indicate? They would say, you know why we're not going in? Because God can't bring us in. He doesn't have the ability to bring us in. They may say that. Or God is not keeping his word. What do we ask? We asked an innocent question. We want to send scouts. We want to prevent Chil Hashem. So in their own minds, they believed it's really for the sake of God. But God knows the true intent. So what does God say? I will let them go. They're going to come back with ominous reports, which clearly will be the basis for their condemnation. And then they'll understand why they deserve to be punished. They'll understand it. It's like when a person's plotting to hold up a bank and everything's ready to go. At that moment, they're able to already prosecute him as if they held up the bank. But people will not understand, but they didn't hold up the bank. They planned it, but they didn't. So the government would allow them to hold up the bank, not allow the money to be stolen, but the moment they go through that bank door where they weren't supposed to, they're arrested and put into prison. Because now you understand why you deserve prison. Otherwise, the person says, we were only planning, but it never happened. But over here, because it was the failure was a lack of trust, and putting God in this, framing him that he's out to destroy you, where everything, he put you on a pedestal to give you the world and eternity. And that you say, he's out to destroy you. And that's what this is all about. So they will only appreciate God's intent only when they truly realize to what degree they failed and to what degree they deserve to be punished. That's why God, but you see something unbelievable. What was the end result of the story of the Meraglim? They came back. 10 spies say it's disastrous. It's a land which devours its inhabitants. There's no way we could survive there. And 2 of them, Kalev and Yeshua, say, no, we will conquer, we will succeed. It's exactly as God said. But the people, they followed the 10. They followed the majority. And they cried. They cried because they believed the 10 over the 2. What was this? This was a level of Chil Hashem. God's name was desecrated. These people, all the Jewish people, the majority, they accepted what the 10 spies said. Meaning saying, God is out to deceive us. He's reneging on his word, or he's not going to carry through. This is Chil Hashem. God is willing to allow his name to be desecrated, to give them an understanding why they deserve to be punished. Because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten it. They wouldn't have understood it. What did we do so terrible? We questioned. You know what you did? Now you see what you did. So God, for the sake of a person appreciating, understanding why he's unworthy, undeserving, he allows his name to be desecrated. This is what happened over here. And once God came into the picture and the 10 spies died, the most gruesome type of death. But what was the result of this? Because God would not allow his name to be desecrated in the context that God reneges on what his intent is. He was desecrated. So God said, when did the spies come back? The night of Tisha B'Av. The night, and God says, just as tonight you cried a crying which was baseless, this day will go down in history, that all the tragedies of the Jewish people will happen on this day. And therefore all the tragedies, the spies, that generation dying over a 40-year period. That was the 9th of Av. The story of the spies, they decreed to die. The first and second temple were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. Beitar, that was the remnant of Jewish community at the time of the Romans. 1 million Jews were massacred by the Romans. These are the tragedies that took place on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because God will allow his name to be desecrated for the Jews to get the message. Because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten the message. What would we do so terrible? Now you understand what you did so terrible. But the result of God proving his uprightness and that he's faithful to his word, he's faithful to his word on the other side of the equation also. Because you did what you did, and I had to desecrate my name for the sake of you to understand, therefore you're going to pay the price. And the price is all tragedies throughout history took place on Tisha B'Av for that reason. But how did the Chil Hashem come about? They spoke Lashon Hara. They spoke negative talk, which was not constructive. What do I mean? They believed it was constructive. We had discussed regarding the laws of Lashon Hara. You see a person behaving in a certain way, and you should have given the benefit of the doubt, and you did not. And you believed that what you had seen, the man that did something which is unforgivable. It's something which is so egregious, so negative. It's such a serious transgression. You're permitted to speak negative about this person, to inform the public who he is. Not only are you permitted, you're obligated. And he believes it. But if you would have given that person the benefit of the doubt, according to the laws of benefit of doubt, you would have understood you had no right to speak one word negative about this person. So it's only because you failed initially by not evaluating it correctly to give him the benefit of doubt, that therefore you spoke endless terrible things about that person. The Meraglim, why did they see it as they saw it? Because they did not learn the lesson from Miriam. The Torah juxtaposes the story of Miriam to the Meraglim. Where did Miriam fail? She spoke negatively, critically about her brother. But the critical observation, if she would have seen it right, it was baseless. Because God says, but don't you realize it's Moshe's Avdi? Firstly, he's Moshe. And they openly communicate with him, which is not your level of prophecy, which is yours much less. Secondly, if he's my faithful servant, if he failed, would I continue having a relationship with him? So that I continue having a relationship with him is a clear confirmation he didn't fail. That your critique is what is baseless. So what was Miriam's failing? She did not assess Moshe's situation correctly. But you have a question. But a question doesn't justify your conclusion unless it's rooted in fact. If they would have said, God said it's a land that flows with milk and honey. It's a land that you thrive there. But we see people dying. You have a question. But your question doesn't allow you to turn that into the reality. And that's what you should have learned. So as a result of that, since there was a basis to see it correctly, and they should have seen it correctly, and they did not, and God gave them the opportunity to see it correctly, and they come back with such negative reports, which is the ultimate level of disgrace of God after all he did for them. To think all this is for that is unforgivable. Therefore, that generation between 20 and 60 will not merit to see that land that he saw in such a negative light, under any circumstance. It's not going to be yours. It'll be your children's, but not yours. You know, there's a Seforno, who's one of the commentators, who says, why did they believe that all this was a ploy ultimately to destroy them? So he explains, we know the Jews were idolaters in Egypt. And even the angels, when they passed through the Red Sea and the waters were flowing vertically, the angels came and said, why are the Jews any less culpable than the Egyptians? If you could destroy the Egyptians with the sea, because they were idolaters, the Jews were also idolaters. So God answered them. One was by choice, one was under duress, because they were the slaves. But the Jews factually were idolaters. The Jews themselves felt they weren't worthy of redemption. You know, it's like a person comes to you and says, person is a pauper, he doesn't have literally what to cover his nakedness with. Person gives me, I want to give you $1 million check. Man says, something? You just gave me life, gave me hope, purpose. Now I could really make something in my life. But after he starts doing it, the person says, it doesn't make any sense. Why did he do it? He doesn't know me from Adam. There are endless other people he could have given to. Why did he choose me? He must have a reason. There's something he has behind. The Jews thought, here we're idolaters. We're not, all we have is, we look like Jews because we haven't changed our attire. We speak Hebrew, the holy tongue, and we retained our Jewish names. Is that enough reason that we should merit redemption? That God should turn the world upside down, destroy the mightiest civilization of the world, the Egyptian civilization? The thing doesn't make sense. God must have an agenda here. So as long as things are going great, you say, why question? But the moment you come back and you see what's going on in Canaan, people are dying wherever you turn, land of giants, and ordinary people are not surviving. They say, something, now it all makes sense. We're idolaters, it's unforgivable, and God will never forgive us. And we, especially in the Ten Commandments, when Ten Commandments, you should not make graven images and have false God. God says he's the avenging God. He will not forgive on that. When it comes to idolatry, God is unforgiving. So now we hear Sinai is unforgiving. We left Egypt, we were idolaters. And now all of a sudden we see this. Now it makes sense. Because he's going to prove his point. Regardless, he'll turn the world upside down. Let you believe what you want to believe. But ultimately, he's going to take his pound of flesh. And that's the way they processed it. But they didn't understand if God gives his word, and especially it was under duress, it was under coercion, it was only circumstantial what they had done. Therefore, they wouldn't have seen it this way. And especially Kalev and Yeshua gave them a way to see it correctly. We always say choice. You have a choice. I once said, the Torah tells us that if you have a question which is irresolvable, you go after majority. Irresolvable. So I asked the question, Ramosha Feinstein, Zecher Tzadok Livrocha, was the leading decider of the generation. He knew the Talmud on his fingertips. He learned the Talmud 400 times. There was nothing he didn't know. Instant recall on everything. Okay? He gives a certain ruling. And you say, PS 15, PS 98, and PS 300. The 10,000 elementary school children. They disagree with Rabbi Feinstein. So based on the law of majority versus minority, you got 20,000 kids versus this old man. So something, we should follow the position of the 20,000 children. Is that the context? When you have an irresolvable question, you follow the majority. The majority is only if everything's equal. You have people of equal standing. And it's irresolvable, you follow that. But who are we talking about over here? God is part of the majority here. The two who are saying, Kalev and Yeshua, what are they saying? It's a land exactly as God said it. It's a land that does not devour its inhabitants. We will destroy them. So, what are they here? Well, we're going to follow these 10 buffoons or these 10 bad people. They're not credible. If God says one thing and the two say exactly what God says and put it in a context which makes sense, they said, yeah. So that means they all had the distrust. The reason why they favored the 10 over the 2, because every one of them had that distrust. Kalev and Yeshua had no distrust. And because they didn't have the distrust, therefore they saw it exactly as they saw it. There's no other way to see it. But if you have distrust and you don't trust God, then you see it the way the 10 see it. And therefore, they failed. And they didn't deserve to go into the land for that reason. Once told over a story I heard. I didn't read it inside, but I told the story of maybe 10 months ago. There was a story, it was right beginning, it was the month of Elul. Month of Elul, it's the month which we begin blowing the shofar. And this woman had traveled on behalf of her husband to purchase textile in Kovna from another city in Russia. And she had a satchel of cash. And that's the way you paid for the goods that you bought. And she checked into a hotel, local hotel in Kovna, and she lost the satchel. Could you imagine? This was the capital for her to buy the inventory for the year. she was terrified. First, for two reasons. Firstly, she doesn't have the inventory, they're out of business. They're not going to be able to support their family. In addition, her husband will fault her for being so irresponsible. It's not it was stolen from her. She misplaced it. I mean, how could you be so irresponsible? Even her marriage may be in jeopardy. She's frightened. First thing she does, she puts an ad in the local paper. Lost satchel, without giving the details in the ad, reward. Finder will receive reward, okay? Next day, she gives her hotel address, her room number where she's staying. Next day, about 2 hours after the paper comes out, she has a knock on her door. A poor-looking man comes and he says to her, I think I found your satchel. I found it. She's elated, excited. She says, I'm ready to give you the reward. He says, wait, not so soon. First, you have to give me very distinct, identifying indicators that you're a satchel. I can't return to anyone. And she gives him, it has buckles, it has certain kind of stitching, it's a certain kind of quality leather, it's a color. She gives all the indicators. It's her satchel that she lost with all the money. She says, are you going to bring it to me? He says, not so quick. He says, I remember I learned when I was a child in Cheder that if a person loses something and they despair, the finder has a right to keep it. I don't have to return it to you. So I'm not sure. I'm a person's destitute. I have nothing. I can't even support my family. I have to beg. If the halacha says I must return it, I'm more than happy to return it. But if the halacha says I don't have to return it, although I could, I prefer to keep it. Whatever the halacha dictates, that's what I will do. This is what he tells to the woman. So she says, I'm willing to go to the chief rabbi of Kovna, Rabbi Yitzchak Chonan Spector, who's the chief rabbi of Kovna. We'll tell him exactly what happened. He will question and ask you questions. And whatever he says, I will do. I will follow his directive. They go to the chief rabbi of Kovna, world-renowned posek, the size of the generation, and he presents the story, and she says, so he starts asking her questions. Firstly, he asked her, did you inform your husband that you lost the satchel? Did you inform her yet? She said no. Did you believe you'd actually find anybody would return it? He says no. I really gave up hope that anybody. It's like miraculous that he brought it back to me. I despaired. Okay. Next question. Legally, in whose name is this business? Who owns the business? You or your husband? My husband, not me. Okay? So you didn't inform your husband doesn't, you don't own the business, he owns it, and he's unaware what happened. And you despaired, okay? We rule that the only way despair affects the status of a lost object, it's only if you consciously despair. Your husband being the owner and being unaware that it was lost, although if he would have known, he would have despaired, since it actually didn't despair, the satchel belongs to the woman, you have to return it. That was the ruling. So she wanted to give him a reward. The poor man, he says, no. If the mitzvah is, I must return it. I don't want to be rewarded for a mitzvah. I'm happy to give it back to you, because that's the will of Hashem. I'm giving it back. And that's the story. So Rabbi Yitzchak Chonan, after he ruled on this case, he said, it's something we could draw a tremendous lesson from here. Tremendous lesson. It's been almost 1900 years. This was in the 19th century. The temple has been destroyed. And every day we're waiting for Mashiach to come. And people despair. This is the longest exile we've experienced in the history of the Jewish people. And we despair. When is he coming? Do we still have hope? We've been through so much. It says even we did despair. So when you despair, it doesn't happen. But who has to despair for it not to happen? You have to be the proprietor. You have to be the master. You have to be the owner. Who's the owner? Who's the proprietor? God himself. God hasn't despaired. If God hasn't despaired, although we may have despaired, he's coming. Therefore, it doesn't make a difference. And therefore, we're guaranteed he's coming. That's the lesson he drew from the story with this woman with the satchel. It's up, who has to despair? If God himself says, who's the master, who's taking the Jews and bringing them and creating this trajectory, we had to go through the desert. We had to go to the desert. The Torah had to be given there. We were about to go into Israel, into the promised land. The last moment, a few days before, they come up with this crazy idea. You know something? Let's send scouts. Although they coded it in sweetness, it's because we're concerned about Chil Hashem. That's the concern. God says, you know something? You've already lost the opportunity. But I will now not allow it to condemn you at this moment, because you're not going to appreciate why you deserve to be condemned. You can say, what do we do so terrible? So I have to allow my name to be desecrated for you to understand how bad and how egregious your transgression is. And that's what happened. But it was all Lashon Hara. But what was Lashon Hara? In their minds, we're innocent. That's the way we saw it. But you had what to draw from. You should have learned from Miriam that just because you don't understand, and the one who gave the guarantee is God himself, you have no right that what you saw, you turned that into the reality. So because you didn't give God the benefit of the doubt, or you didn't have the faith, therefore you deserve to be condemned and to perish over the 40-year period. Very often people say, you know, I'm a pretty good judge of character. I just met a person, I really don't like him. Why don't you like him? The way, it's his body language. There's a mitzvah, hafto recha kamocha. You want to be neutral on men is one thing. There's an expression in Hebrew, kabdeo v'chashdeu. You know, you have to give a person his due honor, but simultaneously, you have a right to suspect, meaning, buyer beware. Buyer beware. Man wants something, you never know what he wants. There are all kinds of people out there. Person has a presumed status, he's not a crook. He's not a criminal. But doesn't mean to say I have to invite him into my home. Doesn't say that. But you have to treat him as an honest, upstanding person. But even that doesn't mean to say you're not my brother. I don't owe it to anybody. Therefore, I'd have to come. But to pass judgment because of that, say, by the way, better be careful from this person. Because then my sense is he's this or is he that. And then you spread the word through the community, and nobody will help him for that reason. You have no right to do it. The Chafetz Chaim writes that if people came and they raised funds in the community, they were poor, and the word went out, people said that these people elsewhere have assets, and really they're dishonest, and they're raising money, and they're really not poor. Do you have a right to, based on that, to withhold the charity that you gave him until that moment? Chafetz Chaim says you have no right to withhold the charity from them. They have a cheskes kashrus, they have a presumed status, they're honest, and because you gave them until then, if the only reason why you're withholding is because of this, which hasn't been confirmed and proven, you have no right to withhold the charity from them. So over there, you're just withholding. But what about if you have a right, you want to arrest him? And he speaks about a case like this. A person has a dispute with someone, and the person is a tzaddik, the one who claims the other person had. Right away, the court goes, and they arrest the person who they think had victimized the tzaddik, and they even beat him up. He says they're doing the wrong thing. They have no right to beat him up. They have no right to do anything to him. Just because the other person is a tzaddik, you can't pass judgment unless you have hardcore evidence that the man is guilty. He has a presumed status. You have no right to do it. But how often, because of one person's status versus the other person's status, they immediately misjudged the person of lesser status, even to take action and even imprison him because of that. And later they find out that the whole thing was a mistake. Give you the example, the famous story with the Abshur Rothschild, the first Rothschild, who was the founding father of the Rothschild dynasty, and he was a tzaddik. He himself lived in Frankfurt, and he was the assistant to the rabbi in Frankfurt, and he was always in his house, and he was his confidant, so to say. And he was in his house every day, taking instruction from him what he has to do. He was like his assistant. And the rabbi had a daughter who he had to marry off. In those days, if you didn't have a dowry saved, put away for your daughter, it was almost impossible to marry off, even though you were a prestigious rabbi. But the men would only marry a woman if they were able to begin their life with some degree of financial support. So they had hidden away in the house a certain amount of money. Okay? Comes right before Pesach, his wife's cleaning, and she realizes the location they put the money, it's not there. She's terrified. What's going to be? Her daughter's already marriageable age. They don't have this money. They're not going to be able to marry off their daughter. So they start thinking, maybe they misplaced it. Maybe they put it somewhere else. They look and they turn over. They don't leave a stone unturned in the house. They can't locate the money. So the wife says to the rabbi, I really, it's painful for me to say it, but I think it's Amshel Rothschild. He's the one who stole the money. Maybe he had some kind of financial hardship, and he justified taking the money. The rabbi says, it's Lashon Hara, it's slander, I will not accept it. But you repeat something long enough and over again enough, and the pain is there, and the concern and the worry how you can marry off the daughter, and his wife just kept bringing it up and bringing it up, until finally, he says, you know something, I don't accept it, but I'll confront Amshel, and I'll ask him. They confront Amshel Rothschild, and he says, I did take it. I did take it. But I'll tell you what I'll do. And I did it because I had a problem, this and that. I took it, and I shouldn't have taken it. And it doesn't exist any longer. I spent it. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I have a home. I have furniture. I will sell all my assets, anything I own, will probably be the equivalent of the dowry. You'll have the money to marry off your daughter. And then he left Frankfurt in disgrace. This is what happened. Impoverished, nothing. Wherever he went. During the year, his wife's cleaning. Guess what happens? They find the back of the money. They find the purse of money. His wife realized that they had put it somewhere else, not where they thought they had put it. So the sexton, why did he do what he did? He was such a tzaddik that he understood the way the rabbi was pained and worried. He was willing to accept guilt, baseless guilt on himself, to provide for the rabbi. He should be able to marry off his daughter. He sold everything, and he left in disgrace. You know what level of tzaddik this person is? The love that he had for the rabbi, that the rabbi, he knew he wouldn't take a gift, but only for the sake, he's willing to leave in disgrace for that. And therefore, as a result of that, what happened? When the rabbi brought him back, and he begged for forgiveness, the hardships he put him through, and what kind of tzaddik he was for doing what he did on his behalf, he gave him a bracha that God should compensate him with wealth, that not to be imagined what kind of wealth he should have. That's the blessing this rabbi had given Amshel Rothschild. And that was, soon after that, his wealth, he soared, began small, became a banker, international banker. That's the basis for the Rothschild family. That's the dynasty. That's where it began. If he would have given the benefit of the doubt, he shouldn't even summon him. How do you put him on the spot? His wife, this, and first, he did the right thing initially. He rejected. He wouldn't listen. And even when he was willing, it was only he will summon him and ask him the question. Maybe even said, I don't even suspect you, but it's missing. Maybe you would know, whatever it is. But he had a sense they suspected he did it. And he admitted it. There's a Gemara. The Gemara tells over a story. He was a student of Judah the Prince. His name was Shmuel HaKoton. Shmuel, his name was Shmuel, the small one. I mean, he was very humble. And the Gemara says that he was so humble that if the Torah would have to be given in his generation, he was sufficiently humble that he was worthy to receive the Torah. Okay? So what happens? Judah the prince is giving a lecture, and somebody had eaten garlic. And the smell was so pungent that Judah the prince, it evidently was sitting within proximity of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi giving this Torah lecture. He couldn't continue. It literally affected him so negatively. So he said, whoever ate the garlic should get up and walk out, because I can't continue. But it's embarrassing. The person who ate the garlic shouldn't have come. He should have done something, because evidently Rabbi Yehuda Nossi was a very humble man. He wouldn't embarrass, but he couldn't continue. So what happened? So he waited and waited until Shmuel HaKohen gets up and walks out. But of course he wasn't the one, because he didn't want that person who did eat the garlic to be publicly embarrassed. If he would have stood up, fine. But the person didn't stand up. But Judah the prince would have continued until that person would reveal who he is, which he would have been even disgraced to a greater degree. Shmuel HaKohen, to prevent that, he stood up, walked out. So Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, who was an early commentator, who lived in France, the Chafetz Chaim cites him, says that if that ever happens, a person even today, if a person should have been judged, given the benefit of the doubt, and they suspect they wonder who it is, you, although you're innocent, you should accept guilt, walk out, so the other person should not be disgraced. Not that you have an obligation, but it's something which is has great value. That's what he says. Even though you're not the one, is somebody suspect, you should say, I am the one. Tell your story going back many, many years ago. All the people who were involved are no longer alive. The chosen was at a Sheva Brachos for a certain person. He's no longer alive. And the story, listen to the story. It's an unbelievable story. This person had married Rav Gifter's daughter. Rav Gifter was the Rishiv in Cleveland. And they had a Sheva Brachos celebration during the 7 day of celebration. And they had a very elaborate meal in the yeshiva to celebrate the Sheva Brachos. Rav Gifter's son-in-law, and he's there. He's sitting on the dais with my Rosh Yeshiva. And there's a custom that the chosen, the groom, after his wedding, he says over a piece of Torah during the celebration. And the custom in Baltimore was that when the chosen says over a piece of Torah, they interrupt it and they start singing. Okay? So his son-in-law starts saying the Torah. So before he starts saying, they were dancing, and there's a certain person, he must have been about 20 at the time, he slips and he breaks his foot. And he's lying on the floor. They're waiting for the ambulance to come to take him. Okay? But as they say, the show goes on. The show goes on, and the chosen's about to say a piece of Torah. And as he begins, 30 seconds of Torah, they start singing to interrupt him, because that was the custom. Rav Gifter was a very strong personality. He gets up and he protests it, and he immediately reprimands the crowd for interrupting. The person wants to say a piece of Torah. Would he have a right to reprimand? Would he have a right to interrupt? It's really a disgrace of Torah. And because in Tells, where he was, they don't do that. But you realize you're not in Tells. This is in Baltimore. It's another, different customs. But he didn't let up. And he was ranting and raving. I don't mean to be disrespectful in terms of him. Didn't let up. To the point, my Rosh Yeshiva then was maybe 15 years older than he was. But it was embarrassing for my Rosh Yeshiva. So he could have told him, just calm down. But he didn't want to say that. So Mara Shiva gets up and says, whoever started the song should get up and leave now. There are about 200 students there with a number of married people. It's really being embarrassed. And Mara Shiva says it again, whoever started that song should get up and walk out. Dead silence. You have this person lying on the floor with a broken leg, waiting for the ambulance to take him. And, and there's stone silence. And Mara Shiva says a third time, we will not continue unless that person leaves the room immediately. Because that person disgraced Torah by interrupting. And Rabbi Gift is fuming. A certain person gets up, walks out. It was not him. It was not he wasn't the person. But he understood first he did it to honor my Shiva. He saw how irate my Shiva became because he had to defend the honor of the yeshiva because Rabbi Gifter was livid over what happened. So that my Shiva himself should calm down, he was willing to disgrace himself and walk out. This is the story. He walked out, literally the same story over here. Otherwise, whoever did start it would be disgraced. To avoid the other person disgrace, that's what he did. This person walked out. He himself must have been 25 at the time. He was still single. He passed away when he was 27 years old. He was married. He had one child, and his wife was expecting the second child when he passed away at the age of 27. I'm just telling you the history. And none of these people are alive. The person who broke his leg is not alive, although today he would be in his upper 70s. And the other people, some of them would be upper 70s also, maybe 80. And of course, my Rosh Hashanah would be much older. He'd be 120 years old. And the other person, but I'm just saying this was the scenario. So one of the other people said, who also became a very outstanding person in Torah, said what we should have done, everybody should have picked themselves and walked out. To tell Rabbi Gifter, you understand, this is not Cleveland, this is Baltimore, and therefore you have no right, because he embarrassed my Rosh Hashiva by all of a sudden taking control of the situation and start protesting where he protested. He should have asked, So there were two, but factually, people felt they wouldn't do that. So this one person went, picked himself up, walked out. That's part of Jewish history. And I'm sure there are many other stories in the annals of Jewish history similar to this story. But the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says that if such a thing should come up, and you're able to deflect disgrace from another person, and you can handle it, even though they will suspect that you did the wrong thing, you should be the one, and later you could clear it up. That's the story. So the Gemara says regarding Shmuel HaKoton that Rabbi Yehuda Nossi had a son. His name was Shimon. Reb Shimon. He says to Shmuel HaKoton, he says, you embarrassed my father. Because later it was revealed that you weren't the one. Here my father wants the right guy to go out, and you go out. You weren't even the person. So he came with him. He says, but you embarrassed my father by behaving in a way that you're the one, but you weren't the culprit. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi says, don't worry, he did the right thing. And that was it. Okay, so you see, then you can see things, they always say the two sides to the story, and then there's the real side of the story. That's the way usually it is. So therefore, people, it's interesting. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that God created, you have billions of people on the face of the earth. There are no two faces which are identically alike. Even if they're identical twins, the parents could tell the difference between the two twins. There are nuances of difference. There are no two faces which are exactly alike. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin asks why. Why did God create the world that no two faces which are alike? People are alive, two faces were exactly like. Why? To teach us a lesson. Just as there are no two faces which are identical, there are no perspectives which are identically the same. They may be similar on the same track, but to be identical, everybody based on their emotional makeup and their intellectual, all together, everybody has a certain nuance of difference of feeling of how to see something, how to read something. That's why you could have two people seeing the same thing and they don't see it exactly the same, although visually they have the same ability to see. But processing, everybody processes in their own context. So that's what the Torah is saying. Just as the face is not exactly alike, and especially, what is a face? A face in Hebrew is called panim. In Hebrew, the word panim means pinim. The face reflects what's inside a person. So that itself is an indication of the makeup of the person. So the face being different indicates the emotional, chemical, intellectual makeup. It's a different. So the composite of everything together, it's a different reality. As a result of that, two people don't have to see something the same way, and therefore we're talking prejudging a person, and that's why Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos that don't prejudge a person until you reach his place. Until you stand in his shoes, you don't know what it means to stand in those shoes. No, he shouldn't have. Maybe if you'd be in his situation with lack of background, lack of finance, maybe who said you would behave differently? Don't judge your fellow until you reach his position, his state of being. You find the Torah tells us it's this extrapolated from, there's a law, if a man rapes a woman and she's between 12 and 12 and a half. So the Torah says he has to pay the father of the girl, of the virgin who was raped, 50 silver coins, and he has an obligation to marry her if the father and the girl are in agreement that he should be the husband, because he disgraced her, he raped her. What about a person that marries a woman, just betroths her, and then when he consummates the marriage, he claims, and at one time there was a hiatus of 12 months between the betrothal and the marriage, what we call between the erison and when he took her into his home. He would consummate the marriage. So after the betrothal, she's considered a married woman. So he consummates the marriage. She was supposed to be a virgin, and he claims she wasn't a virgin. And he brings witnesses to court who testify that she committed adultery during this 12-month period. And that's why she's not a virgin. So if she's found guilty, what do? She's put to death for committing adultery. What does the father do? The father claims, it's hard for me to believe. And other witnesses come and prove that the witnesses that the husband had brought were conspiring witnesses. He paid them off. The witnesses who are conspiring are put to death because they conspired to kill an innocent person. And the husband, two things happened to the husband, who actually created this terrible, terrible slander. He gets lashes. In addition, he has to pay 100 silver coins to the father. Okay? So the Gemara says, the Talmud says, for raping a woman, which is bad, go forcibly rape a woman, you only pay 50 silver coins. For slandering her, you pay 100 coins. So which is worse? Physically accosting a woman and creating all this pain, physical pain, or going and slandering a person, lashon hara, or slander. It's double. He pays double. And it says because hotzi shemra, because he went and he slandered an innocent person. So we see over here that slander is worse than actually physically attacking a person, accosting her, and taking away her dignity through the physical action. What do people do when they feel somebody somehow outpaces them and they have greater glory than they have? Not that they're deserving of that glory, they'll do whatever they can to try to minimize that other person. Somebody says, the person's great. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear? Other person will make a comment. Make a certain facial gesture. Would indicate it's not what you think. He may have been given that position, but if you would only know what I know, he probably wouldn't have gotten it. And even when he has it, they'll learn. They'll learn. What do you have to make the comment? You didn't hire him. You're not the one who's going to have any consequence from that man having what he wants. So what do you have to make this comment? What do you even have to make? What do you have to grimace or do anything? The answer is because when somebody else somehow outpaces another person, it's somehow the person feels he's been diminished because that indicates he's less than the other person because he doesn't have that acknowledgement or he never achieved what this other person achieved because he has that position. And when people say things, and sometimes people say worse things, they'll even do something to be detrimental to the other person, to take him down, to undermine his success, because they can't tolerate that pain. The envy doesn't allow them to see another person succeed. And they'll go and they'll make up all kinds of tall tales, which is literally slander, that the person should fail. Always. You have such people. It's a known fact, there's a rule of thumb. You can have the best idea in the world, the best idea. The moment you allow it to become public knowledge, before you actually execute it, guaranteed it will fail. Once it's out in the public, nobody said anything. Because people, we speak about ayin hara, people have certain senses about things. And the negative very often. Because whenever a person hears about somebody else's success, or even possible success, it hasn't even reached the pre-embryo state, but just even an idea, and the person has a sense it's something may be good, there's a negative feeling about it. Those negative feelings create a negative energy, it will not allow it to happen. That's rule of thumb. So if you have any good idea or something you want to do, you want to launch, keep it under wraps until it's ready, in effect, and it's succeeding. Otherwise, it will not succeed. So you can imagine, and if somebody does succeed, and they hear about it. Did you hear his son was accepted in Harvard? His son got a certain position. And his son didn't get that position. And even if he doesn't have a son, because if he would have wanted, he doesn't have that son to pride himself, it bothers the person. So what's v'ahavta l'recho kamocha? You should love your fellow as you love yourself. Meaning, you should be happy for the man. Rather than being pained or having this negative feeling, you should be happy for the person. There's something we all have to understand. I always speak about the Yetzer Hara. He always whispers in our ear to create some kind of question. But if we would know, a test is only a test if you're able to withstand the test. If you can't withstand the test, it's not a test. As I always say, I put 2,000 pounds on his back. I want to test your endurance. You're crushing the person to death. There's no way he can hold 2,000 pounds. Something within the realm of reasonable, if he exerts himself, he's able, maybe. But if it's beyond, it's not a test. A person is confronted with something, and he has a certain negative feeling, or he speaks which he shouldn't speak. Well, it's too difficult. It would be too difficult. It's not a test. That you're confronted with this challenge, you definitely have it within your ability to succeed, to take control, to suppress it. That you did not suppress it, you failed. Because if you couldn't have suppressed it, God wouldn't have presented that challenge. And that's the way immediately you deflect the Yetzer Hara, you push him away. It's too difficult. So what do you do when you take that approach? You think the Yetzer Hara gives up so easily? Doesn't give up so easily. what he does, and that's why you have to be so proficient in the laws. He says, you don't realize this is not Lashon Hara. There's a mitzvah to speak about this person. He turns it into a mitzvah, so there's no reason to suppress it. But if you would have made the evaluation and seen it properly, you wouldn't have even considered. So I'm saying he has you coming and going at you're fighting a battle on every front. It's a forefront battle, continuously. Sometimes he lets you go. And when you think you're safe, he hits you with the big one. He'll give you another challenge. Something that you wanted and you didn't have it. Your daughter's dating a certain person and he leaves your daughter to marry someone else. You wish you had that son-in-law. You understand? But if you understand everything is meant to be as it is, and you get what you're supposed to have, you shouldn't be upset. You say, thank God. If it wasn't meant to be, I didn't want that person to shoot my son-in-law. If it wasn't meant to be. That's it. People, they agonize not getting a deal. Then 30 years later, they realize that person who had the deal, because he became so wealthy, he committed suicide. You understand? That's how bad the deal was. Because there was so much illegal whatever going, and the government was after him. That's how poisonous that deal was. But what do people know? What do people know? Real estate market. Person owns real estate in Manhattan. All of a sudden now, it's disastrous commercial real estate. People used to envy these people. The rents they took. But mortgages they have, they can't meet the mortgages. What do they do with all this real estate? You say, thank God I was never in that position. But what do people know? Therefore, you have to have that degree of trust that God doles it out the way, based on whether you're deserving or whether it's meant to be. Otherwise, so therefore, you have trust and you have no reason to feel negative and just walk away from it. But you understand, but as the spies, you had 10 to 2, and the 2 weren't ordinary people. And they were exceptional. Yeshua and Kalev, unfortunately, they followed the 10, and as a result of that, that whole generation had to perish, and that day was designated as a day of doom on the Jewish calendar, and that's been doomed throughout the history of the Jewish people. We're going to stop here today. Okay? Daf Yomi is at 11 o'clock, 11 to 12. Everybody be well. Have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.